What they didn't know was how much grief or anger they were holding in their body. Because a lot of the women that come to work with me are in functional freeze. And these women are highly successful, highly functional, but still frozen. So the work that we do is really about thawing and softening, and so that we can shed those protective layers and, you can actually live a life from authenticity and your truth, really.
Hi, welcome to the Connect with Sheila Botelho podcast. I'm an entrepreneur, self-care strategist, and creator of the Season Self-Care app. I'm committed to helping you live into your purpose, get healthy, and build your version of a happy, successful life. And today it is interview day. I am so thrilled to have my guest here today, who is a transformational coach, spiritual mentor, somatic healer, microdosing guide, and acupuncturist. Her name is Po Hung. And with a background in finance, real estate investing, and over 20 years as an entrepreneur, she really understands the pressures and challenges that her clients face. Like many of them, she once believed that fulfillment came from constant achievement until she realized that this approach actually blocked her from the inner peace, freedom, and intimacy that she most craved. So the answer was shedding her protective walls and embracing the power of her yin, feminine energy, which is all about softening, surrendering, and opening to receive. So get ready to step into your next evolution by having your inner world match the success of your outer world. And we're going to get to know Po here today. Po, thank you so much for being here. It's such a pleasure seeing you.
Thank you for having me. Yes, I'm excited to have this conversation and see how it all unfolds.
Oh, our conversations always unfold in magical ways, I find. And so I've noticed, like from our time meeting in a membership group a number of years ago, I've witnessed you on this journey of self-discovery and transformation, even at this element, like this time in your business. And so I would love for you to share a bit about where you started and what led you to dedicate your life to helping others find more peace and alignment.
Well, it started actually when I was a child because I knew that without knowing the word healer or energy, I knew that that was a big part of who I was. And intuition and psychic abilities, they were all part of my way of moving through life since I was young. So that was always in me innately, and I cultivated it with practice, right? Like over the years. But also, I had many, many traumas as a young person. And so I was immersed into deep, deep healing. And at first suffering, right? Like it was a couple of decades of a lot of suffering. And so I personally had a journey of what I guide my clients through. And not everybody is at the depths of suffering that I experienced, but I have such deep understanding and compassion and strategy, for how to move through it because I consider myself a practical mystic. I'm very grounded and practical, efficient, and I like being effective, but I also am very connected to energy and all those parts that are connected to the unseen realm. So my own personal experience brought me here. But also, my studies around being an acupuncturist and working with patients. And, you mentioned in the bio, I came from finance and real estate. So I really bring every aspect of every career that I've had into my work. I find that that's always part of it. Like I was a dog trainer and dog walker when I was in my 20s. And I even bring what I learned as a dog trainer into my work now. So there's so many pieces, and I'm happy to go deeper into some of them. But I always knew that I was called to support other powerful women that really desperately want to be connected to their body, because that's really the type of woman that is attracted to me. They're very much in their heads and they feel disconnected and they want more intimacy. They want to feel fully expressed. They want to find that flow in their life.
Yeah, I'd love for you to go deeper on that piece because in your work, you really guide women through deeply transformative experiences. So, talk to what some of the common shifts are that you see when they start to connect more deeply with themselves. What are the manifestations?
Yeah, so we always begin with creating space because I find that these women are very busy, overworked, or maybe workaholics, or find all the ways to distract themselves. So, one of my favorite and most potent tools is the 1% rule. And I know people have heard this in many different ways, but I find that the women that have gone to all the coaches and therapists and programs that haven't had the success or results that they desire, it's because they're hard on themselves. They're perfectionists, right? And a lot of times people who are attracted to me also people pleasers. These are all things that I have worked through and continue to work on. And so the 1% rule is so powerful because it brings this practice of being deeply compassionate and kind to yourself, not only in your mind, but like this expectation of, oh, I should have been here by this time. And the magical piece of this rule and this practice is that the slower you go, the more compassionate you are, the faster you arrive to actually where you want to be. And that has been what I have seen with my clients. So, they get into flow. They're like, oh my gosh, like one of my clients right now, she's the first time in her life and she's probably around 60. She said, I haven't felt in flow since I was a little girl. So it's been decades. And so this is what's possible when we create space and create boundaries and do the somatic work and, use our voice to ask for what we need. It's all holistic, but so much is possible to shift when we're kind to ourselves.
Oh, yes. And so what does that 1% like represent then?
It represents like it's good enough,
Gotcha.
right? It's good enough because they're so hard on themselves saying like, oh, it's black and white. I need to go to from 0 to 100 or I need to be the good girl, the good student, and I need to show up 100% all the time. And I say, no, you don't. What about if you just showed up 1% more today or opened up your heart 1% more to love, right? It's not this all or nothing. There's a whole spectrum. There's a whole spectrum, and if you can just lean into the 1%, it's cumulative, right? There's a compounding effect, just like with interest. Talking about my finance background, right? There's a compounding effect, a little bit every day, or if you are engaged in a practice for 1 minute at a time, versus saying, "Oh, I can't do that practice because I have to dedicate an hour or 30 minutes." And I work with a lot of moms that are busy, and so can we put those expectations on the shelf and say, okay, I'm just going to do this practice for 1 minute and that's good enough. And not only is it good enough, it will make a huge shift in my life.
Yes, I 100% agree to the 1%. Just doing that little bit more. It's like a titrated type of improvement over time. I love it. And so, for so many women, success does seem to come through burnout. It's totally the pillar of my work that I experience and work with women through so often. So, how do you help them recognize when they've reached that point? And what are some ways they can start to heal while still moving forward in their business? Like the 1% rule definitely speaks to that. But what are some other kind of very simple shifts that they can make that don't involve like a huge other list of to dos?
Oh my gosh. So the first thing that pops in my head is boundary work. So this is like a big part of my work too, because to me, the way I teach it, it's not about logic and what's right or wrong necessarily. It's about what is your body asking for? What is the wisdom of your body trying to say? And are you listening to it? And so when women hit burnout, there's probably been many years or months, decades perhaps, where they have been ignoring their body and their needs. And so how can they first recognize what their need is by paying attention to their energy and saying, oh, I'm a no to this, right? Like maybe somebody asked them to do something and typically they would feel compelled to say yes because that's usually their first answer without even thinking about it. That's how I used to be. And then, but instead, like, what if you paused and just felt into your body and felt, is it a yes or no, and then honoring it, right? Not ignoring it, not saying, oh, I can't do that. What if you actually just followed through with it? And oh my goodness, that is such a game changer. I mean, there's more to the boundary research work that I do, but like to bring it into a nutshell, I feel like that is such potent work because it also helps you practice using your voice, really loving on yourself, right? Really honoring who you are and what you need in terms of day-to-day things or your most basic needs, because that's what is missing when you get burned out is like you're not getting the basics.
Absolutely. And one of those things, like once they actually have the boundary set, it seems like that would open up space. And I know you love to talk a lot about presence and like being in the present moment and being able to, in that place, really tune into your intuition. So, talk a little bit about that, the power of presence for your clients and what you see as they make those boundary shifts, being more present with themselves. Like what kind of results do they tend to see in their lives at that place?
Oh my goodness, everything changes. Like when you bring presence into the day to day, that includes being connected to your body. Because as a somatic healer, as somebody who really helps people to integrate the mind and the body, the yin and the yang, right? The feminine and masculine energy, this means that you are tuning in to moment of what that moment is asking of you. And that inner voice now has space to arise. And so some of my clients, they find that they will actually say the thing in the meeting that they normally wouldn't say, right? Because they're attuned to that moment. They're attuned to their inner wisdom in that moment. Because if you are cluttered inside, right? If there's all this repressed emotion or overthinking and disconnection from the present, then it's hard to allow yourself to feel the truth of what wants to arise in you. And so I find that speaking the truth, saying the thing, is a big result that my clients have. I mean, it's immense. Like women are having more orgasms, right? Like better sex. They're healing their relationships with their kids and their partners. So presence is really the foundation of it all and brings this next level of consciousness so we can actually make a different choice because we get so habitual, right? Because I help people to rewire their brain and their nervous system with my work, but also with microdosing. And, we're the nervous system is ingrained in a specific way with our habits and our patterns, our way of thinking, our beliefs. And so when you have that presence and space, you can make a 1% adjustment, right? Or 1 degree shift. If you think about geometry and angles, a lot of times, again, people are like, oh, I want to make a 180-degree shift. What if you just shifted 1 degree? Guess what? You're in a completely different trajectory, completely different location. And so having that presence, that space, you can make that 1 degree shift. And then, oh my goodness, a whole nother outcome is possible.
So good. Just those little shifts over time. And though, as they're working with you, how do you find the openness they have? Like as they're moving through the process and you're saying, try this, how much resistance tends to come up as they're saying, okay, for instance, like you talk about helping women work from more of a place of flow rather than force. And so I can imagine what those conversations are like because I get them on my end too. It's like, how is that even possible? Like, less I do, more money I make. How how is that? How does that work? So, what do you walk them through to kind of get them to visualize and imagine what could be? And then maybe talk about the second step of that, which is some of the specific somatics and practices you have them go through when they're working with you.
Yeah, so I at the beginning just inundate them with so much transmission of it doesn't have to be the way you've done it in the past. Like, let's open up our minds to another pathway. And I'm literally helping them to see it differently because they've been so focused on the negative, right? It's all been focused on what's not possible, what I haven't been able to do. I've tried this before and that hasn't worked, right? And so I'm always helping them to see it from a different framework. And that is from the what is possible, right? Like, see the possibility. We set intention. That's always the first step of working with me is what is your actual intention here? And can we come up with an intention that's going to land in your body? It's not just a mental affirmation. It is something that actually clicks in your body and makes your body like turn on, right? Awaken, feel alive, and really holding on to that intention and doing the practices that are going to keep bringing them back to it. So that's the first step. And then we always do the work of, okay, mental fierceness. That's part of one of the processes I take people through is we're going to cultivate your mental fierceness because our brains are so wired again to see the negative. And how can you create a different relationship with your ego and your mind? And so this is where my dog training came in play because I realized that, oh, when I train a dog, they actually want boundaries. They need boundaries in order for them to feel happy and good and calm and safe, right? And so it's the same thing with my ego. Can I hold boundaries and hold space and befriend it in a way that I can have a relationship and not get sucked into those stories and, negative thinking? Instead, I'm like, okay, I see you and I'm a no to that story. And so a lot of times the boundary work isn't only about life and like people asking you for things, it's boundaries with yourself because we're
Yeah.
right. And so, yeah, so creating that kind of awareness and presence, you can start to notice those moments when, oh, I'm totally crossing my own boundary. And so when we cultivate that mental fierceness, then what I teach them is the mind is actually a powerful tool, but we use it to put our attention on something. What do we want to put our attention on? That's what we use our mind for. And so in the somatic practices, we get to say, okay, I'm spinning out here, I'm overthinking or whatever I'm doing in my head, and it's actually causing suffering. Okay, I know this pattern. Instead, I'm going to use my mind and redirect my attention from all the spinning out and actually making it worse. And I'm going to bring my attention into my body. And I'm going to feel what sensations I'm feeling right now. And it might be like my heart is pounding, or I feel tightness in my chest, or heat in my stomach, or it could be a headache, right? So those are all sensations. And that practice in itself, my client literally yesterday said that her anxiety has gone in half because of this practice.
That's incredible. I think a lot of it comes down to, like you say, when we get present and when we actually turn our attention to ourselves as opposed to all of the outside demands and the other people. Because, as we were mentioning earlier, the boundary, the people pleasing, like it's very popular with many people, particularly women. And so turning the focus on yourself in a really beautiful, safe space where you can actually let your own guard down, it's pretty incredible what comes up. And so this is amazing. I'm sure it's like they must say to you that they maybe didn't realize that there was anxiety there, that they couldn't name it. Like, do you find like the power in naming it also helps them to relieve it?
I find that they do know that they have anxiety. I find that some of them are depressed, but what they didn't know was how much grief or anger they were
Right.
holding in their body.
Yeah, like
That's
the
what
extent of it, right? The extent of it. Yeah.
Yes, how deep it goes and how much they were holding with their inner child wounds and how much lived in their nervous system, how frozen, because a lot of the women that come to work with me are in functional freeze. And these women are highly successful and they have probably, they could even create multiple seven-figure, eight-figure business. I have a client like that right now, a one-on-one client, and she's done all the things. She's highly successful. Nobody would ever think that she is has a frozen nervous system, but she does, right? And so she's highly functional, but still frozen. So the work that we do is really about thawing and softening, and so that we can shed those protective layers, and you can actually live a life from authenticity and your truth, really.
Yeah, I found in my work, it's very interesting when you see people who have such a high level of success freeze up in certain other areas. It seems counterintuitive, but really it makes sense. I think it's all about focus, right? Where you're focusing your energy um, for years and years. Yeah, eventually that's all going to really work. But then there's other parts of our life that often it becomes more difficult to make decisions around. And sometimes it is that like that other level of what our life could look like because we've bought into what it's supposed to look like or, something that's been modeled for us. So I love that you're walking people through that. And now to touch base on the microdosing that you've done, like in recent years, I have definitely been seeing a lot of discussion around microdosing and its potential benefits. And I would love to know, like, how do you see practices like these complementing the more traditional forms of self-care for women and the coaching that you do so that they're able to step into like their next level of business growth or their next level of relationship intimacy using this type of guidance?
Oh my goodness, like it is such a game changer, Sheila. Like I am blown away and I love that it's micro dosing, just like the 1% rule. Like so
Yes.
often people think that they need to do a big thing, but really these little subtle nuanced tools make all the difference. And I just want to say that microdosing, just so anybody listening, if they know, they don't know, it's
Yeah.
taking such a small amount of psilocybin mushrooms, which is magic mushrooms, and you take such a small amount that you don't feel high. There's no psychedelic effect. You can literally work out, drive, work, be with your kids, and you don't feel off, right? Instead, it actually lifts your mood and helps to increase neuroplasticity so that you can rewire your beliefs, your patterns, all those things that get really sticky because the older you get, the less neuroplasticity there is. And so you get to create these new neural pathways. And so what it does is it accelerates the possibility of the rewiring, which is so important because if your brain and your nervous system are stuck in a certain way, it takes a lot more work to let that go. And so this supports you in doing that. And so yeah, moms are microdosing, entrepreneurs, executives, founders, everybody is microdosing because they've done so much research on this topic and have seen how safe it is and how effective it is. And I find that it's great because it helps to increase focus, creativity. It elevates the mood because it decreases the blood flow to the amygdala, and the amygdala is responsible for fear and trauma responses. And so it automatically increases your mood and creates more space. Speaking of space, like I find that a lot of my clients will say, oh my gosh, now I feel like I have this space to actually make different choices where before it just felt like so much inside, so chaotic inside.
Mhm.
And, it helps to soften the nervous system, which is everything. So there's so many examples like how it can help you, but I've helped people get off of antidepressants, off of Ritalin, which is for ADHD, anxiety medication. Like there's just so many possibilities with this medicine.
Wow, that's amazing. And when you mentioned, like, what really was interesting when we first had this discussion was when you said it actually decreases the blood flow to the amygdala. I'm like, oh, Gilda, Gilda needs decreased blood flow. That's my amygdala's name. For people who've been listening to the podcast, they know that. She can get loud. And so I've learned to befriend her, but it would be really, really nice if we could just kind of, make her really sleepy. And so decrease the blood flow. That would be awesome. But what's interesting is you mentioned also that the neuroplasticity, which, we all know this, or maybe we don't all know this, but I've read this and it seems to be common knowledge that as we age, there's less neuroplasticity, right? Because I look back at my younger life and I was not a daredevil. Okay. I was still that girl who could not dive in the deep end or jump in the deep end. It took me hours to just even get a toe in. But there's things that I would do, like I paraglided in Europe, off of mountains. I'm like, I don't think I would be wanting to try that right now, So like, there's something about in our younger years, the things we're willing to do, the chances we take, learning to drive. Now my teenagers drive, and thankfully, I'm very peaceful about that experience. But I know a lot of people get really stressed out about anything new, and myself included with certain things. So, anything that can help our neuroplasticity kind of improve for all of the things, because I'm a big believer that, in our 50s and beyond, like this is really the stuff of life. Like we get to do so many cool things at this stage of life. So, I love that there's something new to explore here. And I know also people who are listening and probably people just like in this conversation may have, there may be some really enthusiastic about it, some who are very skeptical, of course. It's the mixed bag. And I know there's a lot of research about it too. So for women who are possibly hesitant about alternative approaches, how do you guide them to really make choices from an empowered place for their healing and growth?
I love this question because I know there's a lot of people who are uncomfortable because they're like, oh, I don't take drugs or, even plant medicine and even if it's a small amount, it feels scary. I would say that, I trust people's inner knowing and power, and I never try to convince anybody to do something that they don't feel comfortable with. And I think that's really important. And I would say, I open your mind and explore, do the research, right? I have actually a PDF that talks all about the science and introduction into microdosing, which I'm happy to share with your audience.
That'd
The
be
link.
great.
Yeah. And so educate yourself, right? Like really open your mind to the possibility of there being other ways and find those resources like the PDF I'm going to share with you. And then feel into your body. Maybe there's like something that's awakening in your body. Maybe there's like a curiosity that opens up, right? So listen to your body and follow where it's guiding you, what instinctual hits are you getting, right? Trust that instead of, because a lot of times people will say to me, oh, I was raised a certain way that was more traditional or conservative or whatever.
Mhm.
And so I have this curiosity to microdose. I've heard this many times, but I feel uncomfortable because I feel like it makes me a bad person because of the way I was raised, because they have these beliefs
Mhm.
that were ingrained into them, right? And so I never try to rush anybody's process, but if you feel that desire, there's something there, right? There's something there that is asking you to lean in. And so I would say lean in. They can contact me. I'm happy to answer questions, or whoever they're, whatever they're curious about. Ask questions, open up the space to even learn about the topic that you might be interested in.
And really, when you think about it, like we're many of us just hearing about microdosing now, but talk to me a bit about, I know you've got the PDF, but maybe high level, like how long has this practice actually been a thing? Because I think about the roots of Ayurvedic and ancient Chinese medicine that a lot of people are just becoming aware of now, but they've been around forever. And my background in the wellness space, where, getting people to consider inviting people to consider taking vitamins when they thought, well, no, like I get everything from the food, to now where, well, of course, you're taking supplements. Like the 30 years makes a big difference. Talk to me about that though. Like, how long has microdosing actually been a thing?
Well, psilocybin journeys, like deep dives, has been around for, centuries, like in the medicine people in, Mexico, where I believe it started. I mean, probably been all over the world, but that's really where I see it beginning, and where the medicine came from into the United States. So deep honoring for the original medicine people who discovered it. In terms of microdosing, it's been around, my guess is decades, like I think just in the most recent decade, the last 10 years, it's become popular, but I'm sure that there's been people microdosing for much longer than that. But I want to make it clear that some people will say that they microdose, but they're not actually microdosing because they think, oh, it's just a smaller amount. I'm not doing like a macro dose. But microdosing is really a subperceptual dose, meaning, again, you don't feel high. And so if you are feeling any kind of altered state, that's not a microdose.
That's a dose.
That's a
That's a
dose.
bit of a dose. We'll call that one a dose. That's a
Yes.
mini dose. Maybe. It's not a micro.
Yes, but it's funny because I actually had a patient, an acupuncture patient that was microdosing before I even became aware of it. And so I remember kind of being like, I don't know about that. And so like I understand from the
Yeah.
perspective of like, oh, it takes the time it takes for somebody to open up to this type of
Mhm.
work. And I just love the fact that there's so much research, like in Hopkins, like the best hospitals and universities around the world are studying this and have been studying it. And it
Mhm.
has been like the results are just like amazing.
Well, and I love that. It's been around for a while. An offshoot from a practice that is centuries old. And it is it is something that there is so much research about, whereas people will often, maybe not people listening to this podcast because I feel they're more holistic in nature, but perhaps, you are watching TV, if people watch TV anymore, seeing a YouTube ad, okay? And seeing like a pharmaceutical commercial and like, oh, I should try that. I should ask my doctor. My doctor will give it to me. So that means it's okay. Well, let's just think about this, right? Plant medicine, though, like it's plant medicine. It's like age old, it's part of the ethos and the ecosystem. And so it's not just manufactured like last year with no like research that's only been maybe funded by the pharmaceutical company, and really time tested, as always, is my favorite kind of research. Yes, we all have to start somewhere, but when it comes to our well-being and our health, I love seeing long-term studies, just like my nutritional studies that I studied when I was in nutrition school. Like some of them date back to, there's one that like all the way back to the 40s. And it's just really, you cannot argue the results, right? So I really wanted to point that out. And that's why I wanted to invite this into our conversation as well, because I know you specialize in so many different, like you help in so many different areas and you have so much experience over the years. But this is really interesting because I've not had someone on the podcast yet to discuss such a thing. So I'm so glad it's you, Poe. And I guess my last question about that then would be, you know, based on your work really being both spiritual and practical, which is like the best of both worlds. How do you guide someone who's just beginning? Like they've just disconnected, like they're on the matrix, right? They just took, I don't know, the blue pill, the red pill, I don't know. And they've been on the treadmill in their life. Maybe they're stepping out of corporate space into entrepreneurial space. Maybe they just realize they want to do corporate life differently. Or maybe they've only learned that success, or that, really success is like work hard, stay up all night, be just push, push, push to get the results. And they realize, oh, actually, I'm witnessing a different way in other people. How do you get them started on this journey in that gentle way?
Oh my goodness. Well, first they have to decide that they actually want it,
Yeah.
because if, like for me, if somebody doesn't have that desire in them to commit to themselves, then it's really hard to do anything after that, right? So I guess the first thing I would do is ask them, like, are you committed? And are you committed to you? Because so many of the women I work with, they have been overgivers, people pleasers, the rescuers, fixers, savers, right? Like just, or martyrs. Like, are
Mm.
you willing to prioritize you, perhaps for the first time in your life? And that can be scary for somebody who has never done that before. And of course, we do it 1% at a time, but that would be where I would begin, is with that question, and see if they have a willingness to do that. And you can usually feel it because they're like, and this is for most people, this was the case for me. Like, it takes, people are either motivated by inspiration or desperation.
Yeah.
And usually it's desperation. It's just like, that's part of human nature. And, some people are able to do it from inspiration, and that's great, but most people don't. And so, are you hitting a certain wall, or having a rock bottom moment, or just in a moment of frustration where you're just like, I'm over this, right? Like, I'm sick of this pattern or whatever is happening in my life. And so, a lot of times, that's usually the moment when they're like, okay, I am willing now to do it differently. And that's really the thing. Are you willing to do it differently? And that could be that 1% differently, and it could be more than that. But are you willing? So that would be the first thing, because without that fire, without that commitment, or even, it doesn't have to be like a burning fire, but at least a pilot light, right? Like, let's get the commitment, and then we can do anything from there.
And that translates into so many different areas of our life. And I love that, because the minute you are calling someone into the possibility for themselves, but knowing that like it is their choice, it is up to them, and then they own that, you can't go back from that in your own heart. When you know, like, I, against all odds, against my history, against my martyrdom that I've lived for my whole life, against my people pleasing that is so hard to disengage from, I made the choice to go all in on me. And beautiful thing is, when you do that, everyone else benefits, by the way. It's the most selfless act ever. And when you do that, just to make that choice, how freeing, how beautifully empowering. And you carry that with you into everything. It's probably, for many people, that's harder than making $1 million a year. That's harder than starting something new. That's harder than learning how to like wakeboard when you're 50. Like, really, this
Totally.
disengagement, right? And once you can do that, you can do anything. And so I love that so much. And I love that you call people into that. One thing I've learned about you in our conversations, and also witnessing you in other people's conversations in our group, you are fierce, but in the best way, because you're holding people to their highest self. And that's what we really need in our coaches and guides in our life. Someone who can see maybe that which we don't see in ourselves. So thank you so
That is
much.
everything. That is really everything. And that's like, I always have a coach or a support. Like, I feel like coaches need coaches, healers need
Yeah.
healers, mentors need mentors, right? And so that's exactly what I do, is I hold that vision for them. They share that vision. I'm holding that for you. And I am holding you at that level, and with a lot of compassion, right? Like, yes, there's that fierceness, but there's also that gentleness. And I find that balance between the two is really what allows my clients to really rise to the occasion.
Yeah. Yes. There is the gentleness too, Poe. That is true. You do have that. I think it's just so it's not always easy to find both in a coach, right? That's why I really believe like what you're doing, like this work we're in as coaches, guides, mentors, like it is a calling, right? It's something that you need to create space in your own life for. So yes, and I love that you also have your own coach and the containers that you step into to help you expand and really protect your own energy. And on that note, I want to get to this next, is talking about your own version of self-care, but I'd love for you to first to share what would be the best way for people to first make a connection with you so that they can learn more about how they can work with you and perhaps learn more about what we've been talking about today.
Yeah, so they can learn about me from my website, taoofpo.com. That's TAOOFPO.com. And if you're on social media, I am on Instagram and Facebook or LinkedIn. I'm not going to dare to spell it out for you, but I'm sure Sheila will have a link for you to
Yes.
connect.
Yes, I will. Just look for
My
Tao
name
of
is
Poe.
Mo.
You'll see it on Google, but I will link it absolutely. And we'll link that PDF that you were talking about, that guide that you mentioned, that I think would be so helpful. And so I would love to know, like, other than some of the things you shared, what would you say is one of the most simple foundational things you do every day for your own self-care as you're getting ready to, and then decompressing from holding space for your own clients?
Oh my gosh. Let me see, because there's many things that, and sometimes it fluctuates day
Yeah.
to day.
Right
Um,
now in this season, and knowing that you're in Miami, hello, I'm thinking ocean and beach. But anyway, tell me, like, what's lighting you up the most?
The ocean for sure. Like I am an ocean person. I need that time to cleanse and to be in mama energy, right? The ocean energy. But on a small level every day, sunlight.
Yeah.
Light, just like on a very basic, like nurturing level. I need to be in nature. I need to smell the fresh air. I need to have some vitamin D. I need to look at the green trees. I need to put my feet on the earth, right? My bare feet.
Yeah.
So I feel like so often, especially since the pandemic, so many people have been on the computer so often, right? And like have been in house all the time and sometimes forget to go outside. And
Yes.
so I was like, go outside and just be, and don't have any AirPods on, right? Like just be and connect with people, be in the flow of just that present moment, and magic happens.
Yes. And I'm coming to you live standing on my grounding mat, having just got some new grounding bed sheets. But my most favorite place is to be lying on the grass under my oak tree. I talk about it all the time on this podcast. There's nothing like it. And that's when the divine downloads come, when I'm disconnected from all of the tech and from everyone's demands, and I'm tuned into the universe, nature.
Yeah,
It's the best ever.
the
And
best.
yeah, so I love it. Oh, so good. This has been such a pleasure, Poe. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh my goodness. I loved this conversation. Thank you for inviting me. I hope that your audience, your listeners receive something from our conversation today, and I would love to connect with them. So if you're, reach out, ask questions, I'm around.
So wonderful. And everyone who's listening, one of the most beautiful ways we can thank Poe for being here is to share this episode with your bestie, tag us on social media. We love hearing what you think. Like, how does this land for you? And is this the type of topic you'd like to dive more into as well? And if so, definitely go to the show notes. You'll see the link. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see the link below in the description of how to reach Poe. And thank you so much for listening. This podcast is such a beautiful way, not only to be able to give you information and practices to move forward into your next phase of brilliance in your life, but it's also a really, I will say, a selfish opportunity for me to connect more deeply with really amazing people doing incredible work in the world. So thank you for listening. I appreciate you and have a beautiful rest of your day. Big blessings.